we went back 50 years because of this corrupt court that we have in the U.S. right now. We just had Roe v. Wade overturned for very terrible reasons that are definitely religiously motivated. And because of that, we're going to talk about how it was before Roe v. Wade. So we had an article of lessons from before Roe, will pass be prologue by Rachel Benson Gold, and she basically just tells us how like abortions happen whether or not it was legal, how people died trying to get legal or trying to get abortions. That there's so many people that wanted to get abortions and couldn't, and illegal abortions were happening to a point where like 200,000 to 1.2 million people were dying. So it's pretty horrible how things were going on back then, and we're probably going back that. So we're going to go over the history of what went down before Roe v. Wade, and so hopefully we can energize ourselves to fight against what happened here. I am just enraged about this whole thing. Like the amount of people that are dying because of this. I think it was like 32% who almost 1 in 3 Americans who wanted no more children were likely to have at least 1 in 10 pregnancy, and that's just. And then they had no options other than to go for illegal abortions at this time. In the early 70s, it was available for women who were able to prove it, but they had to like get like permissions in order to do it from their doctors, and it was harder. It wasn't something like they could just take care of. They basically had to fight for the right in order to get their abortions. Zach, did you have anything that you wanted to add on to this?
So I also wanted to add on a little bit more, sort of as an addendum to this, this is very bad, but there is, and I hate to be morbid, but it can get worse. I found another study from the Guttemacher Institute, the same website that first article comes from, and it noted that whenever abortion was legalized and whenever abortion rates fell, that contraceptive use also rose. And so from a certain point of view, it can be seen that as rights increase, so does abortions and so does contraceptives, the use of contraceptives. Here's the problem. Judge Thomas mentioned that the Supreme Court needs to be looking at, or rather reconsidering, previous rulings, and one of those included the married couple's right to buy and use contraception without restriction by the government. So while abortion is bad, it is possible that it can get worse than this. Abortion is like the safety net, and contraceptive is another hurdle towards suffering. And they are trying to remove these hurdles, which we need to put back up. We need to continue fighting this, and we just need to keep that in mind, as it can get worse, and we need to be aware of that.
It's definitely going to get worse, but because of these religious judges, they're already talking about how they want to push for the contraceptive bans and bans on like gay marriage and stuff like that. But we already have like plenty of examples in this article of how fucking bad this whole thing could get. Like I don't know if you guys have been on Facebook or any social media right now, but people are giving stories of people that are already dying because their doctors can't perform necessary surgery for like ectopic pregnancies and stuff like that. This is like doctors have to weigh whether or not they can give necessary surgery or possibly lose their license.
Oh gosh, I genuinely don't even know where to start with this. I think it's important that we remember, and Zach, I'm very glad that you brought up Clarence Thomas's remarks on which Supreme Court decisions we should be looking at next, because it's important to remember that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the talks of overturning Griswold, Obergefell, and Lawrence, and all of the hundreds of anti-gay, anti-trans laws that have been passed in multiple states across the country are all sides of the same coin, which comes down to far-right Christian nationalists attempting to control the morality and behaviors of Americans. It's absolutely abhorrent. I can't describe the feeling I had on Friday when I heard the news and on the Saturday when I woke up the next day. It genuinely reminded me of the days after my father passed away. And I would wake up and suddenly be hit by this wave of realization. Just waking up and remembering, oh, yes, this terrible thing happened. And I'm fairly fortunate that I live in a blue state. So people will say, oh, don't worry, your uterus is fine, your rights are fine. But I genuinely give no flying fucks about that when millions of women in over 13 states so far have essentially lost their entire bodily autonomy. If we're going to talk about what the United States was like before Roe v. Wade, I'm so saddened when I think about how many young women, how many mothers, how many people lost their lives because they could not access a safe abortion. Hospitals had entire wards that were specifically dedicated to dealing with women who were bleeding out and dying nightly, constantly full of people who were unnecessarily harmed. It's so unbelievably frustrating to be in this situation, and it will take years to fix because unfortunately the Supreme Court is a lifelong appointment. So just buckle up.
Yeah,
definitely.
we certainly need to do that, don't we? It struck me that the article itself we're looking at today is like from 20 years ago, and it was it felt even then the need to talk about like how important Roe versus Wade was, because that's the entire focus of it, looking at abortion before Roe versus Wade. And now it's like we just seem to, and I'm not in America, as you can probably tell, but I'm not in America, and even outside America this just feels like a massive kick in the teeth to everybody.
Absolutely. Like going back to this, like it was talking in the article. It was like 1930. They listed the official cause for death for 2,700 women having died of abortions, and we had in Harlem alone. It showed in 1962, 1,600 women were admitted to Harlem Hospital for incomplete abortions. Like they see all this kind of stuff, and it seems to go right over the right wing religious Christo fascist heads right now because they're worried about getting the abortions for their base. There so like you go online, you see like all these videos. Like my Facebook feed is full of like abortion propaganda where they're trying to show you how horrible it is, like a baby struggling from the inside. Instead of like going to the facts of what actually happens when you ban abortions, they're just playing up towards their base. They're trying to play like they'll use loaded language like it's a baby, not a fetus. You're a murderer or something like that. It's all ignoring what's happened in the past. The only thing that banning abortions does legally is it bans safe abortions. And so women are going to die. People with uteruses are going to die. I don't want to exclude anybody, but this is terrible.
Yeah, Zach, you had something else to say on it.
Yeah, so also I should mention in the same article, it also points out that abortion bans, and specifically making abortion illegal in the past, specifically affected poor people and women of color. It was extremely detrimental to these communities, and I think that the article mentioned that birth was like 26 times more dangerous for a Puerto Rican woman compared to a white woman. So it did disproportionately affect disenfranchised communities and impoverished communities.
Yeah, and to sort of jump off that as well, something that, when we're talking about what the United States was like pre-Roe, we have a lot of horrific information about that, and I think one of the silver linings that I almost found in this situation was, well, at least we do have modern medicine, at least we do have access to telemedicine and safer abortions, and I hope that we won't see as many back alleys or coat hangers as we did back then. But that is a pretty shitty silver lining, because we don't even have to look too far into the past to see what is going to happen, because as of right now, when we look at state by state data, we see that states that have very restrictive abortion laws also have higher maternal mortality rates. And as far as how that directly impacts poor women, and particularly women of color, the maternal mortality rate for Black women in the United States is 16 times higher than it is for their white counterparts. We already know what is going to happen, and women and people with uteruses are going to die.
Yeah, and that was the case before, as well as when we look at the statistics from before Roe versus Wade, it was the poor who fared worst. And then a study of low-income women in New York City in the 1960s, it found that almost 1 in 10, which is 8%, had ever attempted to terminate a pregnancy by illegal abortion. Almost 4 in 10, 38%, said that a friend, relative, or acquaintance had attempted to obtain an abortion. Of the low-income women in that study who said they had an abortion, 8 in 10, 77%, said that they had attempted self-induced procedure, with only 2% saying that a physician had been involved in any way. And, that reflects in kind of the fears that we're looking at now, because even physicians are scared. The doctors are saying they're scared of doing these things in case they have legal ramifications put against them. A lot of this fear is kind of looking back, as we're doing, on what was happening before and looking at those statistics which we have available for that.
Like we can hope for the medical intervention being better, but this is also just taking medical intervention off the table for things that need to happen. Like there's a lot of medical complications that could come about by losing this. And yet we've progressed a lot, but like taking it out of doctors' hands is not the right way to do this. This should be something it's shown in the past that taking this away from them does limit doctors' choices and does leave death. Back then they did still have states where they would try and travel but like traveling wasn't easy back then. It's still not easy for people nowadays, like with how things are. This is a real big regress, and it wasn't good for the people back then. It's definitely not good for the people now.
No, it's certainly not. Genevieve.
Gosh, I want to focus on what we were faced with pre-Roe, but I think it's also important to point out that just on Friday, clinics around the country were scrambling, canceling appointments, calling hundreds of people, hundreds of couples to cancel these services. It's kind of sending people today into a massive tailspin. And there was even one woman who went to the doctor with severe bleeding. She had an ectopic pregnancy, and she almost bled out because her doctor had to spend 9 hours reaching out to their lawyers and their legal team to make sure that he could perform a procedure on her without losing his license and without getting sued and without getting fired. As soon as we decide that these religiously driven laws and morals are more important than the actual genuine medical advice of a doctor and the opinion of a person who is in their care, we have fallen so far. And we fought so hard 50 years ago, 100 years ago, to obtain these rights, and to have them stripped away overnight is just shocking.
Yeah, and as we've said, we are going to return, I think, it's not going to stop people wanting abortions. It's not going to stop people getting pregnant. And before Roe versus Wade, abortion, both legal and illegal, had been part of American culture. In fact, estimates of the number of illegal abortions in the 1950s and the 1960s range from 200,000 to 1.2 million per year. And that's not just going to change overnight. People aren't just going to stop wanting abortions or needing abortions, because just because somebody's decided that they're not allowed to have them.
Yeah,
Zach.
Well, another thing we mentioned earlier, well, first and foremost, the reversal of Roe v. Wade is affecting all states, but some states will keep it legalized. That may change in the near future, but for right now, there are still places to go. The issue is, as already stated earlier, historically and today, banning abortion affects those most vulnerable. It affects the most poor. It affects the impoverished, and it's dangerous for people to leave state. Is I've heard stories of people that have been prevented from leaving states because they were suspected to be leaving to get an abortion. And so this is going to present a huge issue. Is even though we do have these states that are safe havens, there are still people that are going to be situated in like New Orleans, and they have to travel across states in order to make it to a safe haven. I think that that's going to be one of the biggest issues. One of the biggest problems is the South, because all of these states have banned abortions, and there's a huge swath of land. You can travel 10 hours in Texas, and you'd still be in Texas. Can you imagine what it's going to be for someone at the tip? It's going to be really bad. And so, yeah.
I live in California. I'm lucky that I'm in one of the states where people can still legally get abortions, but this is not something that should be a state by state issue. This is something like, I don't understand the idea of a law that works in one state and a law that's in another state. Restricting freedoms one place and allow it in other places doesn't make sense. They're going to come for the states like mine. They're going to try, and we need to be paying attention to that, because of this is just that you'll see that they're talking about it's a state issue. That's how it always should be, but they're not going to stop there. We've already heard Mike Pence talk about going for more power and trying to take it into the federal laws so that it's across the board losing abortions. And I know we're supposed to talk about the past, but we've seen the past reflect onto the present and just how the power grabs are going to go. And like, we're open. There are ways that people are trying to like fund people getting out of state and getting into safe havens for this. And even like other countries, you've talked about, Canada is talking about how they'll let people in, but you got to be paying attention, because there's talks about even trying to prevent people from doing that. They're trying to inform the laws from the past with like bullshit standards that don't make any kind of sense, and they're not going by what's actually happened in the past. And all that happened in the past was people died unnecessarily about these abortions because people worried about. Well, this is obvious. This was propaganda by the Republicans in the first place. They didn't used to even care about abortions until they made it into a legal issue that they found out their voters cared about. So until they could manipulate, then it wasn't an issue. People need to look into the past and see that abortion being an issue has not been like a big thing in the United States for a while. We were getting abortions safely, and then suddenly the right decides that they want to push their bodily autonomy for people that can have babies on. They wanted to push that away from everybody, and we're going to have to be fighting hard against it, because they waited 50 years patiently to try to get these overturned. They were like constantly pushing, sneaking people into the courts that definitely should have been in the courts, denying some presidents the right to choose their somebody in court, despite the fact that they weren't allowed to. Despite the fact that they were still in office, and they snuck him in another justice in later.
Yeah, Genevieve had some interesting notes about pre-Roe versus Wade abortion, and how the if I remember rightly, how they looked at life, and now it wasn't even considered a life like they do now. They talk about very much about life being in the womb. But before that, Genevieve, you'd talked about life not being considered life until breath came into it.
Yeah, and I will say that the Catholics, they've always had to stick up their ass about this issue. They've sort of made up their minds about it. But for Protestant evangelical Americans, for a long time they saw the right to an abortion, the right to choose, as something that was important to uphold. They did not see abortion as sinful. I mean, we saw this in the Southern Baptist Convention, in the statements that they made in the 70s multiple times, saying that there were ample reasons why a woman would need an abortion, whether that be for medical reasons, for cases of rape or incest, or even for financial or emotional reasons. And prior to Roe being, prior to the ruling, we even had an entire organization made up of interfaith clergies and church leaders who were assisting women in finding safe abortions. And it's really terrifying to see specifically why this changed. And this change in the narrative had nothing to do with Roe v. Wade, passing. What this had to do with was Christian schools like Bob Jones and Liberty University, which went by another name at the time. After Brown versus Board of Ed was passed, after we desegregated schools in the United States, they were told that if they did not desegregate, if they did not allow Black students at their institutions, then they would lose their tax-exempt status. And Bob Jones, in fact, did lose their tax-exempt status for a little while. And so even then, these church leaders realized that they couldn't go out there into the streets and tell their congregants that they should vote for conservative politicians who hate Black people and want to keep them away, because even then that wasn't very popular. But this argument about the unborn, this argument about abortion being murder, that was something that they could absolutely very quickly change people's minds about, regardless of the fact that it's not biblical, regardless of the fact that they once had compassion for these women. It's amazing how overnight they, through this propaganda campaign, through political organization, we have come to where we are today, where most evangelicals that I've spoken to about this have no idea that that was just their position 50 years ago. It's tragic.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed, and it is tragic. We're going to wrap up the first article. Just a few final thoughts. I'll go with you first, Zach.
I don't think I have much more to add compared to what I already have. It could get worse, and it's not based in American tradition to ban abortion.
No, it isn't. Genevieve.
Well, the last thing I'll say is that, when reading this final decision by Samuel Alito, it's so frustrating that they point to this not being written into the Constitution, nor is this part of the traditions of the United States, because as Zach just pointed out, yes, it is. We've always had abortion. But secondly, I wonder why the fuck it wasn't in the Constitution. Was it because it was written by a bunch of young white men who did not consider women as their equals? If that is the standard that we want to apply to the decisions that we make today in the 21st century, there are a lot of rulings that are going to go away, and they will be the ones that do not benefit straight white men.
Yeah, white privilege has been around for a long time, and it's still here, unfortunately. Josh, your final thoughts.
Speaking as somebody with white privilege, we're supposed to look to the past to inform the future, or else we're doomed to repeat it. I know that's a very overused quote, but it definitely seems like the court did not look at the past at all when they made this decision. They did not take into account all the people that are going to die by them banning these abortions. This was purely religious in nature, and it's pretty damn horrible.
Yeah, it is indeed. Okay, let's move on from that. It got a bit heavy there.